Hi, this is Bob Papa, voice of the New York Football Giants, and this is the Big Blue UK and Ireland podcast.
Welcome back, Giants fans, to this new series, and please welcome my guest for this episode, NFL columnist, Giants beat writer for the New York Daily News, and host of Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard. It's Pat Leonard. How
Craig,
you
what's
doing?
going
You good?
on? I'm doing
You
great. I'm
good?
doing great. Thanks for having me on. Yeah.
No, like I said, thank you for coming on. So this is like a new series we're doing with beat writers, content creators, UK Giants fans, US Giants fans, literally anyone, one a day. It's been going for about a week. It's gone down quite well. So 5 questions, quick fire, 20 minutes, we're done.
Let's go. There's so much to talk about, as you know, Craig. And
Oh,
like you're
God,
saying,
isn't there?
you're going around the league right now. It's so
Mm,
funny, like when, because I'm at the Giants every day, even though I cover the whole league for the Daily News. And it's amazing when you're around a team every day, how much, is going on. You could look at the bottom of a roster, you could look at the top of the roster, you could look at dynamics of the coaching staff. It's just so it's like if you miss a day, you feel like you've missed a week because so much happens as they're getting ready for these seasons.
yeah, especially as we're doing the lead up now. So if we'll start with you. How did you get into sports journalism and how long have you been covering the Giants? Because I know that you did the Rangers and the
Mhm.
NHL for a bit. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So I've been at the New York Daily News since 2010. I actually started at the Daily News on the online sports desk. The job was advertised as a sports writing position, and I apply, I get an interview, I take the train up to New York City, and I realize instead of covering a New York team, this is a 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift building the website as an editor. And I thought, well, that's a little different than what I was aspiring to do. But it ended up working out perfectly because I was offered the job, I take the job, and I ended up sitting in a newsroom with basically titans of the industry, people who had,
Mm.
been putting out the Daily News back page and the Daily News sports section for years, for decades, who knew what they were doing, who were gracious enough to teach me how they did it, and then allow me to kind of immerse myself and include me in the process of, let's say, shouting out a back page headline and having them use my idea and then seeing it in the newspaper the next day out on the newsstands all around Manhattan. And that was a thrill. And so I did that for about a year and a half. I actually did a fantasy football blog at the time and
Mm.
kind of showed them that I could write. And they would ask me to go cover a Red Bulls game, go cover this, go cover that. And so I cut my teeth, showed them that I could handle myself and not embarrass the paper if I was out representing them as a writer, and eventually got offered the New York Rangers an NHL job. I did that
Mm.
for 5 seasons. That team was winning while I was covering them for the most part. So that was fun. And then I started doing the Giants in the NFL in 2016. And I've kind of grown into our NFL columnist role as well as I've been covering the Giants.
You went from really good Rangers team to current state of the Giants team, yeah?
That's right. And even though it's, what is this, year 8 or 9 with the Giants now, whatever it is, you would think by this point it would have turned, having gotten
Yeah.
here in 2016. But of course, as we know, well documented, constant changes of regimes, same ownership, but unfortunately, same story in a lot of these seasons.
So one of the big things about the offseason this year for the Giants was Hard Knocks. How did that get perceived in the building, and how do they feel now that that's over?
I think the Giants understand. Well, first of all, I think they felt good about the fact that they let so much get in as far as y- I wouldn't expect this kind of transparency from most NFL teams. And even though they had cameras everywhere, like that was a lot to let out for an
Mm.
organization. So I do think it reflects better on an organization that it gets out rather than that they would have, kind of have their hands over everything and being paranoid, for lack of a better word. So I thought that reflected well on them, and I think they were proud of that. I do think the Giants, and Joe Shane has said this, there were some uncomfortable moments in there that if they had full editorial control would not have gotten out. Right. And I think a lot of that has to do with kind of Joe Shane's process behind the scenes. maybe some of the situations and scenes where he's getting advice on how to handle, let's say, Saquon Barkley's market or what the running back market is going to be. And it looks like Shane's desire of the direction he wants to go in and kind of the information he wants to use is different than really the sound advice he's getting from some of his team. So I thought it reflected that they have more of a first year operation or first time GM head coach operation than like a seasoned veteran collaboration that the Giants fans would hope it would be and hope it would become. I still think these are guys who are learning as they go. And obviously, you know, there are some good things they've done, but also that's worrisome when you're thinking about, are we going to hit on enough draft picks here in New York to build a foundation to turn this around? Or is this going to be a seat of your pants player acquisition operation that doesn't ultimately build a team that has an identity? So, you know, I think the Giants internally feel like it went as well as it probably could have for the most part. But I do think around the league, it kind of showed teams that the Giants still have a lot of issues they have to overcome.
What do you think about the perception around the league of the format? Like, do you think it will happen again, this kind of hard knocks off season?
Well, I can certainly tell you as I was watching it, one of the first things that went through my mind is, okay, Howie Roseman and the Eagles would not allow this, right? Like that was just one team that kind of came to my mind as far as like, I know how they work PR wise. I know how Howie is, you know, that wouldn't happen. So that was, I think it was a big enough hit and an interesting enough compared to even though the training camp Hard Knocks are a lot of fun and all, but it is formulaic. I think people know what to expect from it. This was extremely surprising, frankly, how much you saw of their behind the scenes process, the player evaluations, the player meetings, things like that. I would say this, a lot of teams I don't think will want to do it, but I do think it seemed like it was popular enough during, let's face it, was there anything else to talk about during that month? Right.
No,
It was
no.
Giants Hard Knocks NFL wise. So in large part, I think that this is something that a lot of teams won't want to do or want to go, but I think the NFL will recognize it was popular enough that this needs to continue and they'll get some other people on board.
So if we flip back to the Giants, last season was horrific. There was a slow start. There was injured players. It pretty much just fell apart from week one. What's the general mood around the team moving into this season?
Well, there's excitement about Brian Burns and Malik Neighbors. They're two most important acquisitions on each side of the ball, right? So they do have more high-end players at some key spots. And Neighbors has been a guy that throughout training camp, he's made plays to kind of validate where they drafted him, what he could be for Daniel Jones and for this offense and for Brian Dable. All of that said, the overall mood and tone around the team as we speak right now, right, as the season approaches, is one of concern. And that is to say, now the Giants are busy right now trying to make, you know, additional waiver claims, player acquisitions to reinforce their roster, trying to get healthy, trying to get ready to face the Minnesota Vikings in week one in that opener at MetLife Stadium. But coming out of the preseason, I would say the fan base and people who have been watching this team day in and day out, like myself, it's very easy to see why this could be another disaster. And the reason I say that is, for example, their secondary hemorrhaging big plays to Aaron Rodgers and the Jets in their joint practice in Florham Park recently. A lot of players on their roster are being asked to, let's say, play one spot above their level. So in other words, Deonte Banks, the corner, he's a good player. Is he ready to be a shutdown number one corner yet? He's probably more of a number two. So you're starting corner, but not necessarily having to, let's say, travel with CeeDee Lamb and face him all day, right? You'd ideally have somebody above him. The Giants roster, if you look throughout it, looks a lot like that. They're going to be asking Jason Pinnock to become a top safety. Xavier McKinney was that. He walks to Green Bay. Is Jason Pinnock able to be your top safety, or is he ideally slotted as your 2 or 3, right? And so the mood right now is this is a team that looks like it needs more personnel-wise, let alone anything else. Daniel Jones has become an incredible lightning rod nationally. I mean, he was already obviously a big talking point in the Giants world, but he throws 2 interceptions in Houston in a preseason game in his first action since tearing his ACL, and the sky is falling. But the sky is falling for good reason, because if that's how the season starts, then they'll lose games to the Commanders and Vikings, and Brian Daboll might not even make it through the year. So it's a little bit of hyperbole, and it's also a little bit of reality as far as the concern goes with the Giants. The last thing I would say, Craig, is the offensive line looks better on paper as far as they've added assets in free agency. They did not draft one. So it looks a lot different up front, but will it look better? So far in the preseason, what we've seen is pass blocking looks a little bit better, but they still give up some free runners, and which obviously you and I know turn into turnovers and big plays for the defense usually. And they have not moved the line of scrimmage well consistently in the running game yet, which of course, without Saquon Barkley now, Devin Singletary is a good NFL player, but you're going to need to get a good push to establish that line of scrimmage. Daniel Jones, you and I know, need that to succeed, play action off of.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was noticeable throughout the preseason when Daniel Jones actually played, I guess it was a half and a bit really, was that he still played like he didn't have time, whereas actually he probably had a few seconds more. Is that fair to say?
I think I think that's insightful, right? He's used to not having time, and so he plays that way. And I think also what you're referring to is when he faces pressure and the look of the defense changes rapidly from what he's expecting, it can become an all-out disaster, right? It's not a dead play, it's a pick six, or it's right. So yeah, I think that's an accurate statement.
So the other thing that we've had with the offensive line, obviously, is Carmen Brasillo's come in as a brand new coach. Have we seen more from him than we saw under Bobby Johnson already, or is it way too early to try to make those assessments?
I think it's too early as far as has the O-line improved because of Brasillo. I will say that, there was early on when he got here, there was a lot of focus and discussion about he was working basically in the weeds on techniques. So hand placements and things that, like in his blocking scheme, the way it's going to marry with Daboll's offense and what he's asking them to do, it's just a little bit different. And you'll find that any coach change that's going to happen. But it started from building them up from the base level of his expectations in the spring and coming all the way through training camp. I would say one noticeable difference is last year under Bobby Johnson, but obviously this was Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll really running this, but Bobby was here. That 3-guard rotation they had in training camp last year where they weren't getting any traction or consistency with their starting five. This year, there's clearly much more of an emphasis on. Now, they still did have to juggle guys around because of injuries, because they signed Van Roten after training camp started. Then they had Van Roten at center and then at right guard while John Michael Schmitz was out. So juggling has happened. But the Giants understand now that the priority needs to be get the guys in the spots and keep them there, right? Work them as a unit. Because Andrew Thomas said it himself. If you don't practice together in the spots you're going to be in, your communication, your ability to have chemistry and work off each other, it doesn't build. It's all off. So, they've already kind of erred in, like, they practiced John Runyon Jr. at right guard and Jermaine Illuminor at left guard all spring because clearly that was the plan. Evan Neal has a setback. So then they changed that. And now Runyon Jr. is the left guard. Illuminor is the right tackle, and Van Roten gets signed to be the right guard with Schmitz at center and Andrew Thomas at left tackle. Now, that might be the best way to do it. I personally, if I'm a Giants fan, I wish that they had that as the plan from the beginning, but obviously they were hoping for Evan Neal to get healthy and be the right tackle. But clearly we see, at least to start off the season, that's not the case.
No. One last thing, just before we get to the fun part. There's a lot of chatter about the potential of Neil maybe moving to guard and whether that's a better option. Obviously, we saw that with Eric Flowers a few years ago, where he was a left tackle. It didn't work out for us.
Yeah.
It then didn't work out when he moved. I can't remember where he moved to, but then he went to Washington as a guard and was much better, played a lot better. Do you think that might have to be an avenue they look at?
I do. I don't know why they haven't tried that already, Craig. I think I was talking to Justin Pugh, who was obviously on the Giants last year, and this was on my podcast probably maybe February or March, coming out of the last season, just projecting where things are going to go. And if you remember, Pugh, when he came into the league and the Giants drafted him in the first round out of Syracuse, he was a guy who was more comfortable on the left, but they asked him to start at right tackle. And it was a disaster. And eventually, throughout his career, he ends up moving over to the left, settling in at left guard. He has a productive, long NFL career, gets paid, all that. And Justin told me, and he was in the offensive line room with Evan Neal last year, that he feels like Evan would be better on the left. And he thinks that, and I've talked to other people about this too. Neal played 2 of his 3 seasons in college on the left side. He played 1 season at left tackle, 1 season at left guard, and 1 season at right tackle. So he had the right tackle flex. But I think there's a feeling of those, people who know him, people who've played with him, that being on the left side may make him feel more at home in the long run. And so I don't know why they haven't done it yet. I do think that ideally the best way for him to help them would be if he could be their swing tackle. But I have not talked to anybody yet who knows what they're talking about, who thinks he could do that for them. So that said, I don't see the harm in just trying to see if he can be a solid backup guard, because you and I, could either of us look each other in the eyes if Jermaine Illuminor gets hurt and say that Evan Neal going in would make the Giants okay at that spot? I mean, at this point, we don't know that. We can't say that. It's impossible to say that with any confidence. And the last thing I would say, Craig, is the comment he made about the fans last year obviously was out of frustration. It's hard to come back from things like that in New York. And so I'm curious. Now, he's not starting in the starting 5, but I'm just curious whether he'll ever be able to come back from that, or if ultimately it turns out that that was kind of the beginning of the end.
It's interesting you say about Justin. We spoke to Justin before he signed back with the Giants at the beginning of last season, and the way that he described it was that it's like trying to wipe your ass with your other hand.
That's right. That's right. When he said, I've heard him say that, and when he says it, it makes you laugh, and then it makes you nod because you're like, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. Let's go on to the quick fire round then. So, favorite other sports teams?
Well, Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I went to Notre Dame. I graduated in 2006, and Notre Dame is like, the team that I will always root for. I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, I grew up in Philadelphia, and so I grew up rooting for all the Philadelphia teams. But when I was a student at Notre Dame, I had to learn how to cover the teams you love dispassionately and remove yourself from it. And so, as a kid, I loved all those Philly teams, but now you can't be a fan when you cover a sport. Like when I covered hockey, I grew up cheering for the Flyers, but when I covered hockey, I covered a Winter Classic in Philadelphia in Citizens Bank Park, Rangers, Flyers, and I felt nothing. And to be honest, it was a little bit weird because, you get into this because you love sports, right? But then, depending on who you are, obviously there's people in the sports world who have a certain brand where they can lean into who they're rooting for or rooting against. But when you're working for a newspaper and you're in my kind of role and profession, you have to try to maintain that objectivity. And really, as you grow into the process, you just become somebody who roots for individuals. So when I cover Eagles Giants games, it's no different than covering Giants Vikings in week 1 to me anymore. But you get to learn the players, learn the people. For example, Saquon, I like Saquon personally in Philadelphia. So I'm not cheering for the Eagles, but I like Saquon. And on the Giants, guys like Darius Slayton, right? Guys like even Daniel Jones. Like Daniel Jones is a really good guy. I like Daniel Jones a lot. I can't cheer for the Giants, but I'll be very happy for him if he has success and turns it around and turns all the doubters into believers. So,
okay, so let's talk about sort of your days on the road and stuff like that. What's the best stadium? What's the best stadium to go to?
Minnesota. It is. Have you gotten that answer a lot?
No, but that was very quick.
Yeah, no, that's well, listen, we are selfish people here, we sports writers who go on the road, and we want our hotels, and we love our dinners out, and we love our, the stadiums that accommodate us. And Minnesota is just a fantastic experience. I mean, the Vikings PR is great. The stadium is beautiful. It's loud. They take care of you media wise in the press box with the food and everything. It's just a full service experience. And the Dallas Cowboys always stand out in that regard too. from a media perspective. The atmosphere, the sight lines, you know, Jerry's got beer on tap in the press box after the game. It's the only stadium that does that now. I remember when I covered hockey, the Calgary Flames used to have beers for us after the game too, and sometimes the Carolina Hurricanes. And the last one I would say too, because it's fresh, is man, the Houston Texans. They were just a list this past visit. I mean, they had like basically an ice cream Keurig machine. You put the can in, it swirls up the ice cream for you. Their PR was great. I do post game live chats with fans on my YouTube channel, and you know, contacted them before the game. They provided a booth for me to go in so I could do it, you know, not unbothered with audio and everything. Like just a very accommodating staff there. So I was grateful for that.
Yeah, we had Ryan Dunleavy on here last week. He was very very pleased with the Texan spread.
Oh yeah, Ryan and I, we were enjoying that together. Yep.
And everyone says Jerry's World. Everyone says that Thanksgiving is incredible at AT&T.
It is. It's especially when you've been at Washington Stadium for Thanksgiving. And then
okay, so that's my next question is worst stadium, and it's been a clean sweep so far. So can you continue it?
It's not even close. Yeah, it's Washington. But I'll tell you this: my one of my friends in the Washington contingent, he basically not basically he does on his way to the stadium to cover their games. He stops at Wawa and gets hoagies or subs or whatever you want to call it for himself and for any other reporter who wants that, so that they have food because they don't want to eat there. Right. So that's the best I could say it. I actually like a lot of the people on the staff there. And I think PR wise, they do great, but stadium wise, sight lines for the media, the food they have at the stadium, I can promise you, no one is more excited other than the fans of the team. No one is more excited for them to get a new stadium than the people who cover the NFL.
Yeah, we've had that a few times. What's the favorite game your favorite game you've ever attended? Fan or journalism, whatever.
This is NFL or anything?
Anything, whatever you want.
Wow. I saw LeBron and Carmelo Anthony play against each other in high school. St. Vincent St. Mary's versus Oak Hill in Trenton. That was pretty special. I get goosebumps thinking about it, man. I could see it like it was yesterday. Any game I've ever seen at the Palestra in Philadelphia, where the Big Five made its bones, best arena in the world. And then I was at a couple games at Notre Dame Stadium. I would say this was not memorable in a good way, but it's the most memorable game I've ever been at, was the Bush Push game, the USC Notre Dame, where Charlie Weiss's Notre Dame team, you know, was threatening to be the best team in the country. And they were about to, or we, and in that moment, it was we, right? We're about to knock off USC, and you had the, you know, Matt Leonard to Dwayne Jarrett with Ambrose Wooden in coverage, the ball slipping right beneath his hand there, or right past his hand, catching him. And then that play on the goal line, we were rushing the field with the clock at zeros when Leonard got hit and the ball got fumbled out of bounds. The whole stadium thought the game was over. The clock was at zero. I was about 40 rows down from where my seat was, headed to the field. And they ordered everybody back into the stands so we could watch Notre Dame lose. And that was devastating, but an incredibly memorable game. I've been really fortunate. I mean, the other one I would say would be the Rangers Stanley Cup loss to the Kings in Los Angeles. Their locker room after the game is etched in my memory forever. I mean, Henrik Lundqvist sitting there with his legs sprawled out, his pad still on, 40 minutes after the game, a baseball cap over his head, just devastation, dejection, all the players knowing that they got there and they probably won't get back, and they didn't get it done. I could go on and on. I mean, I really could. I really could. You're sending me down some memory lane here. I appreciate it.
That's cool. That's cool. So 2 left. You've obviously covered the Giants for a while now. Who are some of the funniest Giants you've had the pleasure of interacting with?
Isaiah Simmons is pretty funny.
Yeah.
He is a really loose, good, good locker room guy, funny guy. Jihad Ward is funny in a little bit of a like, wow, I've never met somebody like this kind of way, right? Like he's no filter, says what's on his mind. I'm trying to think. Russell Shepard, really funny guy, um, like an all-time high school athlete who was a star at LSU, NFL wide receiver, very funny guy. I'm trying to think. Jason Pierre-Paul, to be honest with you, very funny, engaging, hilarious, good, good interview. I feel like I'm leaving somebody obvious out, but I would say those guys stick out to me. Oh, this is one people would appreciate. Eli Manning is funny. Like
Mhm.
Eli is the kind of guy who he would be the quarterback of the Giants when he needed to be, right? But he had one-liners and a sense of humor that would always stun you when it came out because you're used to him as being buttoned up. And then he would, you'd find out about a prank he pulled on his lineman, or he would make a wisecrack at the end of an answer. And you'd realize that as much as this guy is this like ice in his veins, 2-time Super Bowl MVP, he's kind of a knucklehead. You know what I mean? And so that was always an interesting dichotomy there, but it part of what makes him so appealing is that part of him too.
And then finally, best highlight from covering the Giants.
Best highlight from covering the Giants. I would say, well, I would say Odell in general.
Mhm.
This is referring to like a play or a game? Is that what you mean?
It's entirely up to you. So when we've spoken to people who have seen Super Bowl wins, they've spoken to us about the run through to the Super Bowl. People have spoken about, being able to interview family members. Like it could be
Got
anything.
it. Interesting. I think, well, everything related to Odell, I think, was just another level of like, he's a superstar. Like, this is a
Mm,
guy who's like an international superstar.
mm,
And you almost don't even have a full appreciation of it when he was here. Like, you
mm,
knew it, but then you see other special players or top players or whatever it is come through, big free agent signings, trade acquisitions, high draft picks. He transcended all of that.
mm,
And I think so things related to him always felt bigger. There was the boat trip, right, before the playoff game. There was him going for something like 220 yards and 2 touchdowns, basically to single-handedly beat the Baltimore Ravens. A game I was at was insane. That's another game
mm,
was up there. Even like, you break a lot of stories, you work a lot on a lot of important stories. I broke the news in 2018, I think, at the NFL owners meetings in Orlando that
mm.
the Giants were discussing possibly trading him with the Rams. And that 2-day window after I broke that story was the most electric 2 days, because John Mara and Steve Tisch were both coming out claiming it wasn't true, trying to put a spin on it. My conversations with sources with the Giants, with the Rams, with people in the league about it, like getting to that news, having it pop, having the whole league talk about it, having the Giants then basically say it wasn't true for a year and then trade him, right? Like that to me was, is almost like if you've ever played a live instrument on stage, it was that
Mm.
kind of feeling, right? Is the feeling of, you're on stage and everybody's watching and listening and it was, it's the reason why you do it.
Like pure adrenaline sort of thing.
Pure adrenaline. And, again, the connection to Odell is like that, you work on big stories, but he's just larger than life. Like he just is as a brand, as a person, as an athlete. He always was. So I know that's now fading further and further into the rear view, but it still is what stands out to me.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Well, thank you for that. That's absolutely phenomenal. That's all the questions done, all the quick fires done. So thank you for joining me. Now, just before you go, just opportunity to plug whatever you want to plug.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously my NFL coverage and Giants coverage in the New York Daily News, and I'm on X or Twitter at PLeonardNYDN. But what I'm really excited about is I have a podcast running now for a couple of years called the Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard podcast, and that's housed Believe Network is the network I do the podcast with, but I house on my YouTube page, which is the PL on NFL YouTube channel. I do guest spots on the Talkin Ball podcast, but we also do Talkin Ball live. And so that's Mondays and Thursdays, 9 p.m. Eastern. And then also Talking Ball live post game after every Giants game. So I go on, it's basically like a radio show where I always have a major point or breaking news that I save for the show that I deliver right off the bat. And then it's a lot of fan interaction, Q&A sessions, and it's really a community that's been building rapidly. I think it's going to be huge now with the season coming. We did it last year, but this season, I think it's really going to ramp up. And the Talking Ball post game is really what is kind of creating the most buzz right now, because I basically go into the Giants locker room, talk to the players, talk to Brian Dable, talk to the coaches, do my reporting, get injury information, and have all my insights from at the stadium, whether it's MetLife Stadium, whether it's in Washington in week 2, whether it's in Germany in Munich for Panthers Giants. And I come right back up to the press box and I go live on YouTube. So it's something no one really is doing. And I think it's a unique way to kind of bring the information directly to the fans.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me. To all the viewers and listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that lovely stuff. Our social links are in the description down below. I'll put Pat's links and his links to the YouTube channel in the description down below. But until next time, let's go Giants.